when the children were in the carriages being processed through, the crowds cheering, but of course, Republic, with a presence that I think we've become quite accustomed to now, appearing to jeer and shout at the children, which I think has been something of a backlash against Republic, a bit of an own goal, I'd say, for the monarchy. And
well, we couldn't see it, to be honest, and we couldn't see them either. I mean, we were back behind the crowd. Hasn't been much of a backlash. I know some papers have tried to make it an issue, but I mean, we weren't booing the children. We were booing, or some people in the protest were booing the royals, because they all go past, within reasonably close proximity to each other. And the point of the protest, or like any protest, is to get noticed and to make sure that, the message is there that this is not a country of, which is wholly behind the monarchy, that there are obviously crowds that will go out and see it, but there are, increasing numbers of people that oppose it.
But shouts of "Not our king" at those young children in the carriages who were there because the public wanted to see them? I was just listening to the
conversation before where there was criticism of Harry for putting their kids on social media. Now, I'm pretty sure William has made similar comments about social media. They troop their kids out all the time. Now, I personally don't think that is appropriate. I think they should be leaving the children at home. I know that some of the European royal families don't involve their children until they turn 18. You'll see that, if anybody tries to, do you know how many children Keir Starmer has, what they look like, what their names are? Most politicians these days also leave their children at home and keep them out of the press. The royals troop them out as part of their PR, which
yes, but as we're also discussing on the show, Graham, the royals have a very different job to politicians. That line of succession, that dynasty, is absolutely fundamental to the institution.
It's fundamental to them, and it's exploiting the children for their PR. But I mean, there's no reason why they can't leave them at home and let them come out when they're 18, when they can decide what they wish to do. And we've seen one of the things.
I would argue with you. The children look very comfortable in those carriages. I've been there at many a trooping. I've seen them. They're happy to wave. What they're not happy to have is protesters shouting at them, "Not our king," when in fact that's their grandfather.
Well, I mean, this is a very silly conversation. I mean, it's not about the children, it's about the monarchy. This is a corrupt and secretive institution. We had a lot of hypocrisy. The word hypocrisy has been thrown around for the last 10, 15 minutes about Harry and Meghan. But I mean, the royals are hypocrites. They don't pay tax.
Something just happened on UK TV that perfectly exposes how royal commentary works. And honestly, it's getting harder to tell whether these people are narrating reality or just emotionally auditioning for palace approval. Because the moment Graham Smith stepped into this panel, the entire vibe shifted from discussion to, oh no, someone brought facts. The segment starts off in the usual, polished, royal TV fantasyland. Carriages, crowds, children waving. Everything looks like a postcard that's been ironed into submission. And then the commentary kicks in with that familiar tone, that soft, carefully curated language that always feels like it's trying to convince you that nothing ever happens in Britain except tradition and gentle applause. We hear about cheering crowds. Then suddenly, jeering. Then the classic panic word gets dropped, backlash. And just like that, we're off to the races. Because you already know what's coming next. The emotional switch. The moment where everything gets reframed so neatly that your brain is basically told, stop thinking, start feeling. And the claim lands. Protesters were somehow shouting at children. Right, of course, because apparently in royal commentary land, every disagreement must eventually involve a dramatic child in danger subplot. It's like a script generator stuck on loop. And this is where Graham Smith does something the panel clearly wasn't prepared for. He interrupts the fantasy. He says, in plain terms, the protest is not aimed at children. It is aimed at the monarchy. And you can practically hear the studio lose its balance for a second, because that one sentence ruins the entire emotional storyline they were trying to build. No, you don't get to turn political protest into attacking children just because children happen to be in the same postcode as a carriage. That is not analysis. That is emotional bait wrapped in royal wrapping paper. But the commentators don't let go that easily. Oh no, they double down on the optics. The children were happy. The children were waving. The crowds were cheering. Everything was fine until those pesky protesters dared to exist in visible space. Translation: we were enjoying the performance, why did reality interrupt it? And that's the real energy here. Royal commentary is basically the art of narrating a state institution like it's a Disney parade and getting personally offended when someone points out it's still a state institution. Then Graham Smith shifts gears, and this is where things get uncomfortable for the everything is lovely and historic crowd. He brings in the structural argument. He points out that monarchy isn't just vibes and waving hands. It's a public institution, a visible one, a funded one, a symbolic machine that exists in the middle of national life, not above it. And if you exist in public space, guess what? People in public get to respond, even if that response isn't polite applause and emotional tears of national pride. That's where the commentary panel starts doing gymnastics. Suddenly, it's about respect. Suddenly, it's about appropriateness. Suddenly, it's about how certain slogans shouldn't be shouted near children. And you can see the rhetorical panic setting in, because once you leave the emotional script, they don't have much left. It's always the same pattern. Step 1, invoke children. Step 2, invoke tradition. Step 3, pretend disagreement is inherently disruptive. Step 4, hope nobody notices there's no actual argument in there. Smith, meanwhile, just keeps dragging it back to reality. He points out the obvious thing that royal commentary pretends not to know. Politicians don't parade their kids as part of state symbolism. Most public figures actively protect their children's privacy. The monarchy, on the other hand, builds entire visual narratives around family imagery and then acts shocked when that imagery exists in public space. That's not an accident. That's design. And this is where the commentators really start to wobble. Because now the conversation isn't about manners anymore. It's about contradiction. You can't build a system that relies on visibility, symbolism, and public staging, and then demand emotional immunity when people respond to it in public. That's not how public space works. But royal commentary has spent so long treating the monarchy like a ceremonial museum exhibit that the moment someone says, "This is still a political structure," they react like someone just turned the lights on in a theater mid-performance. And the funniest part? They keep trying to win the argument by describing what things looked like. The children looked happy. The crowd was cheering. It was a nice moment. Cool. That's not an argument. That's a postcard. Smith is talking about structure. They are talking about vibes. And that gap is exactly why these conversations never land. One side is explaining power. The other is describing pageantry like it's evidence of innocence. At one point, it becomes almost absurd because the implication is basically this. If something looks nice, it can't be questioned. If children are present, politics disappears. If crowds cheer, legitimacy is automatic, which is a brilliant formula if your goal is to never think too hard about anything ever again. But Smith refuses to play along. He keeps bringing it back to accountability, visibility, cost, institutional role, the uncomfortable stuff that doesn't fit neatly into royal TV packaging. And every time he does, the commentary energy shifts into damage control mode. More talk about respect, more talk about boundaries, more talk about how this feels wrong. Feels wrong is not an argument. It's what you say when your framing is collapsing and you don't want to admit it yet. Because here's the real truth this clip accidentally exposes. Royal commentary doesn't like protest. It likes controlled emotion. Clapping, fine. Waving, lovely. Ceremonial visuals, perfect. But dissent in the same frame? Suddenly it's a moral crisis. And that tells you everything you need to know. Graham Smith isn't even raising his voice. He doesn't need to. He's just refusing to pretend the stage is sacred. And that, more than anything else, is what makes everyone else uncomfortable. Because once you stop treating the monarchy like an untouchable storybook and start treating it like a public institution, the entire commentary style built around reverence starts to fall apart. And what's left? Just a very awkward reminder that reality doesn't care how nice the carriage looks. And what really makes the whole panel feel like it's quietly spiraling is how hard they lean on emotion instead of actually engaging with the argument. It's always the same safety net. If you can't challenge the structure, just upgrade the sentiment. Suddenly it's about tone, about respect, about how things felt in the moment. Not what the institution is doing, not what it represents, just vibes and discomfort dressed up as analysis. It's commentary as emotional buffering foam. Meanwhile, Smith keeps doing the thing that clearly irritates them the most. He refuses to treat royal visibility like a sacred exception to public scrutiny. The monarchy isn't floating above public space like some decorative artifact in a museum. It's moving through it, funded through it, justified through it. And the second you accept that, the idea that it should be insulated from reaction starts to look less like principle and more like preference. You can almost see the frustration building in how quickly they pivot back to optics whenever the structural critique lands too cleanly. But the children were waving, but it looked joyful, but people were cheering. It's like watching someone try to paint a wall while the foundation is being pointed at. No matter how many layers of gloss they add, it doesn't answer the actual question being raised. It just makes the avoidance more obvious. And that's why this exchange sticks, not because it was loud or chaotic, but because it exposed two completely incompatible ways of talking about the same event. One side is trying to preserve a curated story where monarchy exists as emotional continuity. The other is stripping that story down to mechanics, power, and public accountability. And once those two languages collide in real time, no amount of polite commentary can make them sound like they belong in the same conversation. What really gets exposed in moments like this is how fragile the respect narrative becomes when it's actually tested in real time. It works beautifully in studio monologues and pre-packaged commentary segments. But the second someone introduces structural criticism, it starts leaning on tone policing like it's a life raft. The argument quietly shifts from, "Is this institution accountable?" to, "Are you saying that nicely enough for us to ignore it?" And then there's the selective sensitivity that hangs over the whole exchange. Certain expressions of dissent get treated like a national disruption, while the institution itself moves through public space with all the symbolism and spectacle fully intact. That imbalance is never addressed directly, just gently redirected with phrases about tradition and unity, as if repeating those words enough times makes the contradiction disappear. What Smith keeps doing, almost stubbornly, is refusing to let the conversation stay in that softened zone. Every attempt to turn it into a story about manners or emotional discomfort gets pulled back to the same uncomfortable center: visibility, power, and who gets to define what public space is allowed to respond to. And that refusal is exactly what breaks the rhythm of the usual commentary script. By the end of it, what you're really watching isn't just a disagreement about a protest, but a clash between two instincts, one that wants monarchy to remain emotionally protected and narratively polished, and another that treats it like any other institution operating in public view. And once that gap is fully visible, no amount of ceremonial language can close it again without sounding like avoidance dressed up as tradition. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.